There is a lion sleeping in the shade of an acacia tree in the Masai Mara, and none of that is remarkable. Lions sleep in the shade of acacia trees in the Masai Mara every day. That is not the story. The story is what is happening 200 meters to the east, in a dry riverbed where the sand is pale and cracked and the grass at its edges has been eaten down to nothing by the drought of the late dry season. In that riverbed, a single spotted hyena is walking, just walking. Head down, shoulders rolling in that distinctive loping movement that makes hyenas look, to the uninformed eye, somehow broken, somehow ungainly, like an animal that evolution did not quite finish. And the lion is watching, not because the hyena is a threat. One hyena is not a threat to a lion. The lion is watching because there is something in the way that single hyena is moving that tells an animal who has lived in this landscape its entire life that something is about to happen. And then the rest of them come over the ridge. Subscribe right now if you want to understand what is actually happening in the wild, not the surface version, not the clip you have seen 100 times, but the full story, the deep story, the one that changes how you see every nature documentary you have ever watched. Because what I am about to tell you is one of those stories. The hyenas that came over that ridge numbered somewhere between 40 and 60, depending on which estimate you use, and the estimates vary because counting a clan of spotted hyenas that is moving fast and in close formation across broken ground is not a precise science. What is not disputed is that they came fast and they came together and they came with purpose, and the animal they came for was not the lion. The animal they came for was a single adult male leopard who had made what turned out to be a catastrophic error of judgment about a kill site, about the smell that kill site was sending into the wind, and about the radius within which 40 to 60 spotted hyenas would be able to detect that smell and respond to it. The leopard's name in the records of the researchers who had been following him was a designation rather than a name, but the field team had taken to calling him Collie, which is not uncommon in the informal vocabulary of wildlife research, where the animals you spend enough time with become individuals who deserve individual recognition. Collie was a large male in good condition at the peak of his physical capabilities. He had brought down an adult impala 2 days before, had cached it in the fork of a fever tree at a height that should have been secure, had returned to it that morning after a night's rest and had begun to feed. It was a perfect leopard morning. He was full, he was high up, the impala was substantial enough to last him another day or two, and the flat golden light of early morning made everything look the way everything looks in the Masai Mara in the early morning, which is to say it looked like the kind of thing that makes people travel 10,000 miles just to see. And then the wind shifted. This is the first thing you need to understand about what happened next. The wind shift is not background detail. The wind shift is the fulcrum on which the entire event turns. A leopard caching a kill in a tree is operating on the assumption that the smell of that kill will travel in a predictable direction, away from the areas where dangerous competitors are likely to be, toward areas that are less populated, less trafficked, less dangerous. Collie had read the wind correctly when he chose his tree. He had read it correctly when he returned to it in the morning. And then the wind, in the way that wind in open savanna can do without warning, shifted 45 degrees and sent the concentrated smell of a 2-day-old impala carcass directly toward a drainage that ran along the eastern edge of his territory. A drainage where he almost never encountered hyenas because the hyenas who denned in that part of the reserve tended to hunt westward toward the grassland. Except on this morning, they had moved east. The whole clan had moved east the previous night following a zebra migration that had pulled prey animals across the territory boundary and drawn the hyenas after them. 40 to 60 hyenas, the entire riverbed clan as the researchers called them, were in the wrong place at the wrong time from Collie's perspective, and then the wind told them that a free meal was sitting in a fever tree 200 meters away. The response was immediate and collective in a way that tells you everything you need to know about why spotted hyenas are one of the most successful large carnivores in Africa. There was no visible signal. No audible alarm, not at first. The hyenas at the front of the group who caught the smell first simply changed direction. And the hyenas behind them, reading the change in body language and movement of the animals in front of them with the precision of animals who have spent their entire lives in dense social groups, where communication is constant and subtle, changed direction too. Within perhaps 30 seconds, the entire clan was moving toward Collie's fever tree with the kind of coordinated efficiency that no individual predator, no matter how skilled, no matter how powerful, can generate alone. Let me stop here and tell you something about spotted hyenas that most people do not know, because most people's understanding of spotted hyenas has been shaped by decades of wildlife documentaries that got them substantially wrong. The reputation of the spotted hyena as a cowardly scavenger, as the villain of the African savanna, as an animal defined primarily by its opportunism and its ugliness, is one of the most inaccurate characterizations in the entire history of wildlife filmmaking. And I want to give you the real picture because without it you cannot understand what Kali was facing, and without understanding what Kali was facing you cannot understand what makes what he did so extraordinary. Spotted hyenas are the most successful large predator in Africa. Not the most iconic, not the most filmed, not the most beloved, the most successful. They kill more of their own food than lions do. This is a fact that has been established by decades of careful research and that still surprises most people who have absorbed the narrative of lions as the apex predators and hyenas as the cleanup crew. In the Serengeti, hyenas kill somewhere between 66 and 95% of the food they eat, depending on the season and the prey availability. Lions in the same ecosystem frequently steal kills from hyenas, not the other way around. The image of hyenas lurking at the edge of a lion kill waiting for scraps is real, but the image of lions charging a hyena kill and taking it from them is equally real and happens with significant frequency. A spotted hyena clan is not a loose collection of individuals who happen to be in the same place. It is a sophisticated social structure, matrilineal, meaning it is organized around female dominance and female lineage, with a complexity of social relationships that researchers have compared carefully and with qualification to the social complexity of primates. Hyenas know each other. They know who ranks above whom and who ranks below whom, and those rankings are not static, they shift with circumstance and alliance and the particular politics of a group that can number over 100 individuals in large clans. They cooperate. They communicate with a vocabulary of sounds, the whoop that carries for miles, the giggle that is not actually laughter but is a stress signal and a submission signal and an excitement signal depending on context, the groan and the yell and the fast whoop that signals the presence of food, that is sophisticated enough to carry specific information about the identity of the caller and the nature of the situation. And they are physically formidable in a way that the word formidable does not quite capture. A spotted hyena can exert a bite force of around 1,100 pounds per square inch, which is among the highest of any land predator on Earth. Their jaws are capable of crushing the femur of a giraffe, not biting through it, crushing it, reducing the hardest bone in the largest land animal in Africa to splinters in order to access the marrow. When a hyena bites something, it does not let go. It does not need to apply the suffocating bite to the throat that cats use because it is powerful enough to simply dismantle what it has caught faster than what it has caught can do anything about it. A single spotted hyena is a serious animal. A spotted hyena clan of 40 to 60 individuals is something categorically different. It is one of the most powerful aggregations of predatory force on the African continent. Lions run from large hyena clans, not all lions, not always. But it happens with enough regularity that it is documented and understood. Male lions in their prime, the most formidable individual predators in the African savanna, will retreat from a sufficiently large and sufficiently motivated hyena clan. Not because they are afraid in the way we use the word fear, but because the calculus is simple. An injury sustained fighting 40 hyenas is an injury that can end a lion's life, and a lion who understands this at the level of instinct and experience does not fight 40 hyenas over a carcass if retreat is an option. Retreat was not an option for Kali, not the kind of retreat that ends the encounter anyway. Here is why. The fever tree in which Kali had cached his impala was not in an open area. It stood at the edge of a lugga, a seasonal drainage in a grove of mixed acacia and croton that limited movement in ways that mattered. The clan came from the east from the direction of the main drainage, which meant they came between Kali and the open grassland that was his easiest exit. They were not executing a planned tactical encirclement. They were not capable of that kind of conscious strategic thinking. But the topography of the site and the direction of their approach created an encirclement nonetheless, because to get to the open grassland Kali would have had to pass through the densest part of the approaching clan, and that was not a survivable option. He could go north, along the lugga, but the lugga narrowed to the north and became deeper and the banks became steeper. And a steep-sided drainage channel is a place where a leopard's climbing ability offers diminishing advantage against animals whose strength is not individual combat but overwhelming collective pressure. He could go south, and for a moment the researchers watching through binoculars thought he was going to do exactly that, because Kali came partway down the fever tree in the direction that would have put him moving south, moving away from the clan's main approach. But he stopped. He stopped and looked, and what he saw to the south was the reason he stopped. A detachment of the clan, a dozen animals or more, had already moved south along the drainage, either instinctively cutting off that line of retreat or simply moving to investigate the smell from a different angle, and the effect was identical. Kali was bounded on 3 sides. He went back up the tree, all the way up. higher than the fork where the impala was cached, into the thinner branches near the crown of the fever tree, and he crouched there while the clan assembled below him. And this is where the story becomes something other than a story about an animal in trouble. Because what Kali did over the next 4 hours in that fever tree is something that the researchers who witnessed it have described, in their papers and in their interviews, and in the careful, qualified language of science that nonetheless cannot entirely contain the astonishment, as one of the most remarkable displays of adaptive behavior under sustained extreme pressure that they had observed in their combined decades of field research. Let me walk you through it. In the first 20 minutes, Kali did what leopards do when they are threatened from below. He made himself as large as possible, he vocalized. He swiped at the animals that attempted to climb after him. Spotted hyenas are not climbers, they do not have the anatomy for it. But they have the persistence of animals that have learned, over evolutionary time, that persistence pays, and several of the younger animals in the clan attempted to scramble up the lower trunk of the fever tree before the bark, which is smooth on fever trees, defeated them. Kali's response to these attempts was fast and precise. A leopard swipe from a braced position is not a casual gesture. It is a controlled application of claws that can open a deep laceration in a moment, and the hyenas that got close enough to feel it retreated. But they did not retreat far. They sat below the tree and they whooped and they paced and they stared up at Kali with the patient intensity of animals that do not experience time the way we do and are not troubled by the prospect of waiting. The impala carcass was still in the fork of the tree, maybe 3 meters below where Kali was crouching. This was the hyena's primary motivation. This was the gravity well that was holding them in place as surely as if they had been chained there. And Kali knew it in the way animals know things, not as a cognitive proposition but as a felt reality that shaped every decision he made. The carcass was the problem. The carcass was also, as it turned out, part of the solution. Around 25 minutes into the siege, Kali descended from the crown of the tree to the fork where the impala was cached. This caused an immediate escalation in the activity below. The whooping intensified. Several animals charged the base of the tree. 3 or 4 of them leaped at the lower branches, and one, a large female who the researchers later identified as a senior clan member, made it high enough to get a grip on the lowest significant branch before falling back. Kali watched all of this from the fork directly above the carcass, and then he did something unexpected. He picked up the impala carcass in his jaws, what remained of it, which was perhaps 40% of the original weight, the hind quarters and part of the spine and the head, and he moved it. Not far. He dragged it perhaps a meter along a branch that extended out over the edge of the lugga, away from the main trunk, and he dropped it there in a position where it was technically still in the tree, still above the ground, but hanging over the drainage in a way that made access from below even more difficult. And then he went back up to the crown of the tree. The researchers watching this were not sure in the moment what they were seeing. Was this deliberate repositioning of the carcass to make it harder to access? Was it simply agitated movement under stress that happened to result in the carcass moving? The honest answer is that distinguishing between those two interpretations is genuinely difficult even for experienced field researchers watching in real time. What is clear is that the effect was significant. The hanging position of the carcass made it harder for even the most ambitious hyena climber to access it, because the overhang over the drainage meant that an animal trying to approach from the trunk would have to extend itself over empty air, and hyenas, not being climbers, are not equipped to manage that geometry. This bought time, whether Kali calculated that or not, is a question that opens onto the deepest and most contested territory in animal cognition research, and I am not going to resolve it here. What I am going to tell you is that over the next 3.5 hours, Kali managed the situation with a repertoire of behaviors that, taken together, constitute one of the most documented examples of extended predator-under-siege problem solving in the scientific literature on African carnivores. He did not panic. This sounds simple, but it is not. Panic is the thing that kills animals in situations like this, because panic produces flight and flight produces injury, and injury in the presence of 40 motivated hyenas produces death. A lesser animal, a younger animal, an animal without the accumulated experience of years in a territory where conflicts with hyenas were a regular feature of life, might have attempted to break out, to run for it, to find a gap in the ring and push through it, and the hyenas would have caught it within seconds on open ground. Kali stayed in the tree. He maintained his position in the crown when the pressure was maximum and moved down to the fork to reinforce the carcass position when the pressure reduced slightly. He tracked the movements of the clan below him with the constant vigilance of an animal that knows it cannot afford to miss anything, but also cannot afford to exhaust itself in sustained maximum alert. So he modulated his attention, active and intense when the activity below spiked, quieter and more conserving when the clan's attention diffused. The clan's attention did diffuse periodically. This is a characteristic of large hyena aggregations that is important to understand. The social complexity of a spotted hyena clan means that there are always internal dynamics running in parallel with whatever the group is focused on externally. Rank disputes, feeding order arguments, young animals engaging in social play that continues even in the middle of what would, from our perspective, seem like a focused collective activity. The whooping and the charging and the tree basing were not continuous and uniform. They came in waves triggered by specific stimuli, a movement from Kali, a sound he made, the smell of the carcass freshening as the morning heat increased. And then they subsided as the internal social life of the clan reasserted itself. Kali tracked these waves. He responded to the peaks with stillness and positioning and occasional controlled aggression, swipes at anything that came close, and he used the troughs to rest, to shift his position for comfort and stability, and crucially to drink from a small pool of water that had collected in a hollow where the main branch met the trunk. This pool was perhaps 2 inches deep, almost certainly brackish from the bark, the kind of water that would not feature in any wildlife photographer's portfolio. But Kali lapped at it twice during the siege, and the researchers noted this because hydration management under extreme stress is a component of survival endurance that often goes unremarked. The sun rose, the temperature climbed. By late morning the flat golden light of dawn had become the vertical white heat of the Masai Mara in the dry season, and the effect on both the leopard and the hyenas was significant. Leopards are physiologically stressed by extreme heat in ways that are not always visible. Their core temperature rises and their respiration increases and their capacity for sustained explosive movement, the kind of movement required to escape or fight, diminishes. Kali's flanks were working harder by mid-morning. His breathing was faster. He pressed himself against the shaded side of the branch he was lying on, minimizing his sun exposure. The hyenas, being more heat-adapted than leopards, had better resources to draw on, but even they modified their behavior in the heat. Several animals moved to the shade at the edge of the lugga. The whooping reduced. The energy of the siege settled into a lower register, a waiting game, a patient occupation rather than an active assault, and this shift in register was, paradoxically, the most dangerous phase for Kali, because a tired leopard in extreme heat making a desperate move is more likely to make a fatal error than a leopard under active pressure that keeps its threat assessment sharp. He did not make the fatal error. Around 2 hours into the siege, something happened that the researchers had not anticipated, and that introduced a new level of complexity to an already complex situation. A pair of lionesses appeared on the ridge to the northwest, the same ridge the hyenas had come over 2 hours earlier. They were not the lionesses of any of the dominant prides in the area. They were what the research team called floaters, females who had been pushed out of their birth pride and were moving through the landscape looking for a new pride association or a territory to establish. And they had their own reasons for being in this part of the reserve that had nothing to do with Kali or the Riverbed clan. They had heard the hyena vocalizations. Hyena vocalizations carry information, and the specific pattern of whooping and calling that emanates from a large clan at a carcass site is a sound that travels kilometers across open savanna and is attended to by every large carnivore within earshot. The lionesses came over the ridge and stopped. They read the scene below them with the experienced attention of animals who have navigated this exact type of competitive carnivore standoff many times. One clan of hyenas, large, concentrated, agitated, one leopard in a fever tree, one carcass. And the calculation that follows from those inputs, in the mind of a lion who is hungry and opportunistic and capable of displacing almost any other predator in Africa from a carcass if the numbers are right, was apparently positive enough to bring them forward. The response from the clan was immediate. The attention that had been fixed upward, fixed on Kali and the carcass in the tree, swung outward and downward. The whooping changed character. The formation of the clan shifted as animals on the northwestern perimeter turned to face the approaching lions. The subset of the clan that had been closest to the base of the tree, the animals exerting the most direct pressure on Kali's position, moved outward to reinforce the defensive line against the lions. And for approximately 15 minutes, the siege on Kali became, if not secondary, then at least divided, as the Riverbed clan managed the dual threat of 2 lions approaching from the northwest while maintaining the occupation of the fever tree. The lions pushed forward, the hyenas held. The lions tested the density of the opposition, decided the numbers were not favorable, and settled into their own waiting posture at the northern edge of the scene, which added yet another layer to an already extraordinary carnivore convergence. What the lions did, whether they knew it or not, whether the calculation was as conscious as it would be in a human situation or whether it was purely instinctive response to stimuli, was give Kali a window. Not a large one, not a clean one, but a window. The redistribution of hyena attention from the tree to the northern perimeter created a gap, not in the physical circle around the tree, but in the density of focused observation that had been locked onto Kali for the previous 2 hours. And Kali, reading the change in the activity below him with the precise attention he had been applying to every fluctuation in the siege since it began, recognized it. He came down the tree, not all the way, not to the ground. He descended to the lowest significant branch, the large female had attempted to climb earlier, and he looked. The specific quality of a leopard's looking when it is making a decision about movement is something that experienced field researchers describe as distinct, as different in character from the scanning and tracking gaze of a predator watching prey or the alert watchfulness of a prey animal, as a focused stillness that is somehow more intense than action, as if the animal is doing something in that stillness that costs more energy than running. He looked for perhaps 30 seconds, then he went back up, not because the gap had closed but because something in what he saw told him the gap was not sufficient. A dozen hyenas were still within quick response distance of the tree base. The large female who had nearly made it up the trunk was still there, still oriented toward him. The cost-benefit calculation, whatever form it takes in a leopard's processing of its situation, came out negative. The lions moved off. The clan's attention returned to the tree. The siege resumed its previous character. But something had changed. The researchers noted it. Kali had assessed an exit option and declined it, which meant he was not simply enduring the siege reactively, not simply waiting for external rescue or for the clan to lose interest and leave. He was actively evaluating. He was tracking the exit conditions and updating his assessment of when those conditions would be sufficient. This is the behavior that the researchers found most striking, more striking even than the carcass repositioning or the hydration management. Not a dramatic act, not a visible display of skill or power, but a moment of evaluation that implies a model of the situation and a set of criteria being applied to that model, running continuously, updated constantly, informing every decision. The third hour of the siege was the quietest. The heat was at its maximum. Several of the younger hyenas had drifted away from the tree, not gone, not outside recall range, but no longer actively participating in the occupation. The senior females maintained their positions. The whooping had reduced to occasional single calls, check-ins rather than alarm signals, the auditory equivalent of a group keeping in contact while their attention drifts. The impala carcass in the fork of the tree was attracting flies in numbers that would have been visible from 50 meters, and the smell was, by this point, a significant atmospheric fact in the area around the tree. Kali did something in the third hour that the researchers had not seen a leopard do before in a comparable situation. He ate. Lying in the crown of the tree, with 40-plus hyenas beneath him and the memory of 3.5 hours of siege vibrating in every muscle and every decision, he descended to the fork, positioned himself carefully with his spine against the main trunk for stability and the branch beneath him solid, and he ate, methodically. Not frantically, not the urgent feeding of an animal that knows it may be interrupted at any moment, but deliberately, as if he had decided that this was what the situation called for and he was going to do it. The effect on the clan below was a fresh escalation. The smell of active feeding intensifying the already powerful olfactory pull of the carcass sent a pulse of new excitement through the assembled hyenas. The whooping rose. 3 animals made simultaneous attempts on the trunk and were repelled. Kali breaking off his feeding long enough to deal with each one before returning to the carcass. But the escalation faded faster than earlier escalations had, because the clan had been there for 3 hours, and the emotional arc of even the most motivated group of animals has a trajectory, and the trajectory, over 3 hours of unresolved siege, was declining. This is a biological reality of sustained group behavior in spotted hyenas that has been documented in multiple field studies. Clan aggregations at carcass sites are not stable over long periods. They form fast, peak fast, and then if the carcass is not accessible, they dissipate. Animals that came from far within the territory begin the cost-benefit calculation of continuing to invest energy in an inaccessible food source versus leaving to find something else. Younger animals lose interest faster than senior ones. Even senior females who have the most to gain from maintaining access to a food source have other demands on their time and energy, their cubs back at the den, the territory patrols that are a constant feature of hyena social management. Kali appeared to understand this or to be responding to the same signals that generated this dynamic: the gradual reduction in energy, the increasing gaps in the whooping, the drift of peripheral animals away from the tree in a way that adjusted his own behavior. He fed, he rested, he watched, he waited. At 3 hours and 47 minutes after the first hyenas arrived at the base of the fever tree, a commotion broke out at the eastern edge of the clan's formation. Not caused by the lions, who were long gone. Caused, the researchers eventually determined, by the arrival of 3 males from a neighboring clan who had apparently been tracking the sound of the riverbed clan's activity for some time, and had arrived at the site with their own interest in whatever food source had generated such sustained vocalization. The intrusion of foreign males into riverbed clan territory was not a food competition event. It was a territorial violation, and the response of the riverbed clan females to that violation was immediate and total. The fever tree was abandoned in under 2 minutes. 40 to 60 hyenas who had maintained an organized siege for nearly 4 hours dissolved into the lugga, and the scrub beyond it in pursuit of 3 males who had made a significant navigational error. And the clearing around the fever tree went from the most chaotic carnivore gathering in that section of the reserve to something close to silence in less time than it takes to describe. Kali waited. He waited for another 8 minutes by the researchers' timing, watching from the crown of the tree as the sounds of the territorial confrontation moved east and the landscape around him settled back into the particular stillness of the African midday, the insects and the heat shimmer and the distant call of a ground hornbill somewhere in the acacia thicket. Then he came down the tree, all the way down. He stood at the base of it for a moment, which is something leopards rarely do voluntarily in open country, and he looked in the direction the hyenas had gone. Then he turned and walked north, along the lugga, moving in the distinctive shoulder-rolling gait that covers ground faster than it looks like it should, and within minutes he was in the croton thicket to the north and gone from the researcher's view. He left the impala carcass in the tree. He had eaten what he needed. The rest of it would be found by the hyenas when they returned, by vultures before then almost certainly, by all the cascading beneficiaries of a food source in a landscape where food sources are competed for at every level. The economy of the savanna would process it completely within 24 hours. Now I want to step back from the sequence of events and tell you what this story is actually about, because there are several different stories being told simultaneously within the account of Kali's 4 hours in the fever tree, and each of them opens into a much larger understanding of how life in the African savanna actually works. The first story is about the nature of leopard intelligence. Leopards are classified as solitary ambush predators, and those classifications are accurate as far as they go, but they carry an implicit characterization of the animal as simple, as fundamentally a machine for stalking and killing, optimized for one function and limited outside that function. What Kali demonstrated over those 4 hours is something considerably more complex. The behavioral sequence he executed, the carcass repositioning, the modulated energy management, the exit evaluation, the decision to feed during the siege, the sustained patience over a period of time that would test the resources of many animals, reflects cognitive flexibility of a kind that is genuinely remarkable, and that field researchers who specialize in felid behavior are still trying to characterize with appropriate precision. Leopards are the most widely distributed large wild felid on Earth. They survive in habitats ranging from sub-Saharan savanna to the mountains of Central Asia to the forests of Southeast Asia to the Himalayan foothills, in environments of such extraordinary variety that the behavioral repertoire required to navigate all of them cannot be a fixed program. It has to be flexible. It has to be capable of generating responses to novel situations, to problems that no ancestral leopard encountered in exactly the same form, using principles and skills that can be recombined and applied in ways that were not specifically trained into the animal. What Kali demonstrated was that flexibility in action, under the most extreme pressure that his particular environment could generate. The second story is about the nature of the hyena clan, and I want to dwell on this because the hyenas in this account are not villains, even though the dramatic structure of the story positions Kali as the protagonist whose survival we are invested in. The Riverbed clan was doing exactly what spotted hyena clans do, exactly what they have evolved to do with extraordinary efficiency and coordination: the rapid mobilization. The topographically intelligent approach that cut off Kali's easiest exits without conscious planning. The sustained patient occupation. The management of the carcass as a fixed resource worth defending over time. The integration of the territorial threat from the foreign males into the ongoing situation with an instant priority reordering that tells you a great deal about how sophisticated the hyena's real-time situational awareness is. There is a tendency in wildlife storytelling to frame predator versus predator encounters as one side being smart and one side being brutish, as intelligence being the property of the individual and power being the property of the group. This framing does a disservice to the hyenas. The clan's behavior over those 4 hours was not the behavior of a mob. It was the behavior of a highly coordinated social unit executing a strategy that, if it had not been disrupted by the external event of the territorial intrusion, would very likely have succeeded. 40-plus hyenas maintaining a sustained occupation of a carcass site for nearly 4 hours, managing a leopard in a tree, responding to lion pressure from the north without abandoning their primary objective, and continuing to coordinate through all of that, is not the behavior of animals operating on instinct alone. The third story is about the landscape itself, about the Masai Mara and what it actually is, because this event did not happen in a vacuum or on a stage. It happened in one of the most complex and productive carnivore ecosystems on Earth, a place where the density of large predators is high enough that encounters like this, carnivore competing with carnivore over food and territory and competitive advantage, are a daily feature of the landscape. The Masai Mara is the northern extension of the Serengeti ecosystem, connected by the Mara River to the vast grasslands of Tanzania that most people think of as the canonical African savanna. The wildebeest migration, perhaps the greatest wildlife spectacle on Earth, moves through the Mara every year, and the density of predators that this annual food bonanza supports is extraordinary. Lions, leopards, cheetahs, spotted hyenas, African wild dogs, black-backed jackals, bat-eared foxes, servals, caracals, and a dozen other carnivore species all occupy overlapping territories in this landscape, all competing for the same food resources with different strategies and different physical capabilities, all exerting competitive pressure on each other in ways that shape their behavior, their territories, their social organizations, and ultimately their evolutionary trajectories. The interaction between leopards and hyenas in this ecosystem is one of the defining competitive relationships in the Mara, and it has been going on for longer than our species has existed in recognizable form. Leopards and hyenas have been competing for food and space in African ecosystems for millions of years. The leopard's tree-caching behavior, the distinctive habit of carrying kills into trees that is one of the most recognizable behaviors in all of African wildlife, is, in significant part, a response to hyena competition. It is an evolutionary adaptation driven by exactly the kind of pressure that the riverbed clan was applying to Kali in that fever tree. The behavior that seems so natural and so quintessentially leopard-like is, at its roots, an answer to a question that hyenas have been asking leopards for millions of years. Think about that for a moment. The thing that makes leopards look most like leopards, the image that defines the species in 100 wildlife photographs, the silhouette of a spotted cat draped over a high branch with a kill below it that has become iconic, that image was written into the leopard's behavioral repertoire by the hyena, by exactly what happened to Kali in that fever tree. By 4 hours of patient, coordinated, overwhelming pressure that has been repeating in one form or another across the African landscape for millions of years, shaping the leopard's behavior generation by generation until tree caching became as natural to a leopard as breathing. The fourth story is about what survival actually looks like, because this is the level at which Kali's 4 hours in the fever tree becomes something beyond a wildlife incident report, becomes something that speaks to questions that matter beyond the specific ecosystem and the specific animals. What Kali did was not heroic in the way that word is usually applied. He did not charge the hyenas. He did not fight his way out. He did not perform a dramatic escape. He sat in a tree and he thought in whatever form thinking takes in a leopard's nervous system, and he managed his resources and he evaluated his options and he waited for the situation to change, and when it changed he left. That is the whole story. And that is the story of survival in almost every context in which survival is actually achieved, in the wild, and in the broader scope of difficult situations that living things navigate. Impulse to charge, to break out, to do something visible and dramatic, is powerful in any crisis. It is the impulse of panic. It is the impulse that the hyenas in a sense were counting on, because a leopard that charges 40 hyenas on open ground is a leopard that dies. Kali's survival depended on his ability to suppress that impulse continuously over 4 hours while remaining genuinely alert, genuinely responsive, genuinely capable of action if action became the correct response. That combination, the suppression of panic alongside the maintenance of readiness, is psychologically and physiologically demanding in ways that are hard to overstate. And the fact that Kali executed it under the conditions he was facing is what makes the researchers who witnessed it describe it the way they do. There is something else worth noting about those 4 hours, something that gets at a quality of the situation that pure behavioral analysis sometimes misses. Kali was alone. This sounds obvious. Leopards are solitary, and Kali was a leopard, so of course he was alone. But there is a difference between the ordinary aloneness of a solitary predator going about its daily activities and the specific aloneness of a single animal, surrounded by 40 members of a highly coordinated social species. The clan had each other. They had the reinforcement of collective presence, the communication, the coordination, the shared purpose that being a member of a group provides even in the most stressful circumstances. Kali had nothing external to draw on. Every decision came from within. Every assessment of the situation was his alone. Every moment of doubt or stress, whatever those states are in a leopard's experience of its own condition, had no outlet, no shared processing, no reassurance from a companion. Solitary predators develop capacities that social animals sometimes do not need to develop in the same degree, precisely because they have no backup. The self-regulation that Kali demonstrated over those 4 hours is, in part, a product of a life lived without a social safety net, a life in which every significant challenge was met alone, and the accumulated experience of meeting challenges alone built the capacity for the kind of sustained, modulated, resource-conserving response that he applied to the siege. This is not to say that solitary living is better than social living. The hyena's social structure gives them capabilities that no individual leopard could match, as the siege itself demonstrated. But it is to say that the